I would be, I think, what Matt would call the evil business person, but because I did start on the ad side, but I work at public media, so I can't be that evil. Um, as Brad sort of said, I've spent a long time in digital. I actually started out, my first job was building an online ad network for college newspaper websites, so I sort of started in the business side of the newspaper world, I guess, if you want to say that, followed by USA Today and AOL. But what's been sort of common across all this is understanding digital consumer behavior for me. So I have a particular interest in multi-platform television consumption. So that's where we're sort of spending our time at PBS now, is extending television programs, not just to the web, but to mobile and now even devices that are connected to the television set. So I'm going to give you a little bit of look into how we measure engagements. This is a perfect segue out of Robin's talk, and a practical example of how we at PBS measure engagement on our digital properties, how we added in consumer data to sort of build out the story, and then how we use that insight to drive our both our product strategy and sort of our content strategies. So let me just tell you a little bit about the PBS website. So mostly for this story, talking about PBS.org, we do a similar thing for PBS Kids as well, but for this talk, I'll talk mostly about PBS.org. Our site is really a collection of companion websites to broadcast programs. So these are some of the most iconic brands in television, long-standing series like the PBS NewsHour and Frontline, documentaries series like American Masters and American Experience. And the website is really a collection of companion websites to all of these programs. So we have sort of an interesting dilemma, because we have sites that are about reinforcing the content that you see on air, sites that are very much aligned to the brand of the program, not the brand of PBS overall. And it's sort of like if you take hundreds of sites and kind of tie them all together with one common navigation. So you have sort of a little bit of a disjointed user perspective experience from just a normal viewer coming to PBS.org. So it makes it a little bit difficult. But as you sort of see through the story, the engagement metric is sort of letting us kind of evaluate these programs against each other. So when we talk about our site, we're, as I mentioned, we're sort of a content-heavy site. We don't have conversion goals that are geared around transactions like most sites. So we don't expect you to come to the site and buy DVDs. We don't expect you to come to the site and donate to your local station. We're really here about reinforcing the television experience. So for us, PBS.org has these sort of 4 desired outcomes. One is to drive tune-in to upcoming programs. So we want you to come to the site, learn about programs, learn what's coming up on the next episode of Nova. We want you to come and visit the site often. So if you're a Nova enthusiast, to come to the site and go deep into something that you saw on air. Or if you're a NewsHour viewer, come and read the deeper interview that couldn't fit on air. So we want you to visit the site more often, so sort of driving up loyalty. We also want you to tell someone else about PBS. So I'm a big believer in likelihood to recommend. I feel like there's two big ways to build your audience. One is to get more people to come back more often, and one is to get new people to come. And so those are the sort of two things that work in concert to build audience. And then finally, we want you to become so engaged with our content that eventually you build a relationship with your local station. So while we're a network, we're really a network supported by 350 local member stations. So the whole system exists because people become members of their station and donate to their local station. So if you build a relationship with people at the national level, we can then extend that to the local level as well. So those are sort of our desired outcomes. Our engagement metric was really an attempt to kind of put a framework around these outcomes and create sort of a conversion metric for us. So since we don't have things like we're not going to optimize for sales, we need to optimize for something. So that was what was sort of driving this idea. So the story kind of starts back in 2008 with some conversations about how do you measure engagement. And there were a lot of things going on. We need to get away from measuring page views. We need to sell against engaged audience. There were some of the luminaries in analytics were deciding, can we figure out a complicated equation? So this is an equation that was created by Eric Peterson at Web Analytics Demystified back in the end of 2007. It was very complicated, but it is a metric that's sort of aimed to get at these content consumption kind of conversion events. So we use this as our inspiration. My boss, Jason Seiken, had been reading these articles about how media sites needed to optimize for engagement, and he's like, can you come up with something? And so I turned to a consultant that I work with, whose name is Victor Aqua, and he and I had begun to think about how we would measure engagement. We were inspired a bit by Eric's work, and you can go to the Demystified site and sort of read all about the history of this metric. But what we discovered is this was a little bit too complicated for us. So we didn't have the systems in place to measure all of these different events that Eric has in here. So we simplified it a little bit, and we made it focus on what we have the ability to measure. So this is what we have done, which is similar. Although that looks really complicated, it really isn't. So we simplified to these 4 measures. And so to be a highly engaged user of PBS.org, a visitor has to meet all 4 of these conditions. So the 4 metrics are click index, so that's sort of a page depth metric. So people who see at least 3.2 page views. There's a duration metric, which is their visits that are 2.5 minutes or more. Recency, which is people who have visited, their previous visit to this visit was in the last 2 weeks. So we're sort of getting that, we want them to be not just that they've been here before, but they've been here recently. And then the loyalty index, which is a visit of at least 3 times a month. So we're looking at really kind of weekly viewers who have been here within the last 2 weeks. So we smushed that all together. So it's actually not that complicated. You get to a number then that you can apply to different content types, different program sites, different platforms, if you will. We set all of these benchmarks based on our site average. So basically, we took the average page depth and said anybody who exceeds average gets put in the bucket. If you were to go and do this, you need to take a look at what's important to you as your site. So it will be either start with your average, this happened to be ours, or start with something that makes sense to you. I would suggest that in a newspaper site, you may want people coming much more frequently than once a week. For us on a television, when a program only airs once a week, it's kind of unreasonable to expect daily usage. So you make sure you apply it to the situation, as Robin said, that's what's appropriate to your organization. So this is all great, and people were really excited about it, and they would talk about it in staff meetings, and I'd have senior people in the staff say to other colleagues, "Oh, we have this great engagement metric. Oh, Amy, what does it mean?" So what I realized over time is that while this is great, and it was fantastic that we said, "Oh, now we're measuring engagement," nobody really knew what to do with it, and so then I realized it was a little bit too complicated. So we had to go back and think a little bit about how do we use this. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how we've evolved over time to use this in context with our other data. So this is a look at, and you don't have to read the numbers, this is a look at our monthly traffic dashboard, and you'll see that we've broken up our data into audience, engagement, and competitive analysis. We have a whole block that's just dedicated to engagement. And we have our engagement metric there in the middle, and we always have a reference to what happened last month and what happened year over year, so you want to make sure you have a trend, right? But we have some other things that go along with it. So we have repeat visits and bounce rate and time on site, so some of those things that go in concert with engagement to put a context around it for the organization. We also use the metric, again, not meant to be read, to apply to each of those program sites. So now we have on this monthly report that shows the traffic for each program, all the way at the end is their engagement metric based on the definition we set. So our program managers can go and look at what makes Masterpiece have so many more engaged visitors than Nova. What's driving engagement in NewsHour compared to what is Frontline doing? So if we're having places where we know that there's a higher engagement, what can we learn from that site and apply to the other site? And sometimes it's not always the same thing. Sometimes it's not a behavior that will apply to another site. So if we have blogs are driving it on one site, a blog might not be appropriate on another program site. So but it's good to try to figure out what those things are. So over time, we sort of began to really delve into what was driving engagement on PBS.org as a totality. So we broke apart the metric. I can tell you what really drives difference in those 4 elements is actually how often somebody visits. So recency doesn't matter as much, and the number of pages don't matter as much. It's how frequently. So if you wanted to be really, really simple, I'd look at loyalty as a metric of engagement. Generally, the sources of traffic, the sites that send traffic to PBS.org are the same for those that are highly engaged and not engaged. Generally, they visit the same programs. So if we stack up programs by highest engagement level and programs by traffic highest non-engaged traffic, they will be in the same rank order. So they're really using the same programs. Their overall usage patterns are fairly similar. But the one thing that we found that really differentiates those highly engaged users is though they consume a lot more video content. And I don't mean just like a lot, I mean a lot more video content. So it really led us to say, let's focus on video at PBS.org in those sort of 2009-10 plays. And even back then, engaged visitors were nearly 3 times as likely to access PBS.org from a mobile device, which also led us to say what are we going to do about mobile? So we still had all of this, and this was some great insight. It got people to start to think, but they still were a little bit questioning. I definitely had people saying, really? They're watching a lot more video? Really? Do we want to drive up video views? Isn't that taking away from broadcast viewership? Isn't it just driving up our expenses because the more video you stream, the more you pay? Are we really going to get any benefit out of it? So I had to come up with another way to kind of help tell the story. And this is where the idea of adding consumer research data to the equation comes into play. So a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with Eric Peterson about the engagement metric that we were using. So he had found out that we were using it, and Chris Mears, who had been at Philly.com at the time, was also using the similar metric there. And so he wrote a little bit of a case study about our use of this thing. And as he was sort of interviewing me, he said, have you ever connected it with other sources of data? And I said, no, I haven't. But interesting that you asked that. I run a survey on my site continuously, and I have the questions that I could put people into a bucket. So I basically used the survey questions to create an engaged user segment in my survey data, because by chance, they happen to be the same sampling criteria. So I was able to actually create an engaged user metric in the survey data and kind of not directly marry them, but inferentially marry them and get a little bit more color about what's going on. So let's see. So here's the example here. We use 4C results survey that's running. We now have 4 years of data, so I should have probably updated that. But our sampling criteria is consistent with the way we define an engaged user. So it actually came together quite well. So what did we learn? So a couple of things. First, video behavior is highest among engaged users. So I've updated this from a previous presentation I've done. When we started out, the primary reason for people coming to PBS.org to watch video, it was about 1/3 of users. We're at now, in 2013, nearly 2/3 of users are coming to the site for the purpose of watching video. 2/3 of those engaged users. But you can see that video is a really critical behavior for those who are highly engaged. And then even among those who, when they actually watch a video. So the reason they came was to watch a video, but they actually, 80%, so 4 out of 5 people, engaged visitors, are watching video. Much, much higher than those that are just here for the first time, if you will. They're also still more likely to be using PBS on a mobile device, so almost 1 in 4 are using PBS on a mobile device. And they're much, much more likely to be watching PBS on air in the last 7 days. So you sort of, if I can tell to my broadcast colleagues, yes, my engaged users on the web, they're not actually taking away from you, they're actually driving tune-in. That begins to tell a story in the organization that was a little bit less complicated than that crazy formula that you saw on the screen, because that's what they really care about. Our engaged users are more satisfied users, so this is our overall satisfaction score. So we have a very high satisfaction score. I mean, we tend to have a high satisfaction score on PBS anyways, but the engaged users are even more satisfied. And then we have at the bottom the Net Promoter Score. We also use another index that 4C has called Word of Mouth Index. Both will give you the same pattern, but you'll see there that engaged users are much more likely to promote PBS compared to those that have been here for the first time. The engaged users are also exhibiting those desired future behaviors. So if you look back to my first slide where our desired outcomes, this is where we connect, right? They're more likely to donate than people who are here for the first time. They're not more likely to tune in than the first time people, but they still have a high likelihood to tune in. That doesn't really surprise me that that's a little lower given how much video they're watching on. So we're very much a full episode video experience on PBS. So given how much video they're watching, it doesn't surprise me that it's a little bit lower on likelihood to tune in. But look at likelihood to return. So they're coming back. That score is in the 90s. So that's really high score. Also likelihood to recommend. So they're getting people to come to the site as well. Again, our engaged users are more likely to watch PBS programs on multiple devices. So of course, they're answering this survey question on the computer mostly. So the computer people, very high that they're watching video on the computer, but they're also very, almost over half of them are watching PBS programs on the television too, and higher watching on tablet and connected devices. So the connected devices are a little newer for us, but I think I'm tracking this over time so that we can see how this grows as the adoption of those devices. Those would be things like Roku and Apple TV and game consoles. So the reason this is important, this is what's really boiled down for our organization, is we were able to sort of demonstrate this virtuous circle in audience. As we grow audience and increase the engagement with them, we're increasing their satisfaction, we're increasing their likelihood to return and recommend, which makes us grow audience again. So we create this sort of cycle and create a growth potential on air as well. So what did we do? So we knew video was really important. So when we did a redesign, we actually featured video pretty prominently in the homepage. So you'll see at the top there's the top strip is about what's upcoming. So it's about driving tune-in, so including video there. A big video block in the middle, that's about catch-up viewing. So that's about what happened last night or in the last couple of days. You'll see video featured throughout. When we redesigned the search experience, we actually put a lot more prominence on video, so including getting to video much faster and video results so that users can sort of get there faster, find that we have this content available. And of course, when we went to mobile, the first thing we did was work on a video app. So this is the PBS.org video app. We also have PBS Kids has a video app. And in the kid space, we're actually much more dominated towards video consumption on the tablet app than we are even on the desktop. So since then, so that was sort of the 2000 up till about 2010, 11-ish time frame. We've now launched video. It's become the currency in our organization. Our corporate metric is all about driving monthly video views. So for our department. And that has given us sort of that common currency that we're all working to. We launched branded video products on all of the PBS member stations. We have responsive web, we have tablet and phone apps where we've launched on Roku and coming in the next couple of weeks on the Xbox with Apple TV and Chromecast right behind it. So we're very much about taking an infrastructure that's focused around video and then spreading it across as many platforms as we can. So what's happened? So in the last 3 years, our average monthly unique visitors have grown 50%. Not a bad little story. Our monthly video streams have increased 120% in 3 years. What's great about this is as we launch on new platforms, you can see sort of as each band gets a little bit bigger. That's when we went from app only to app and responsive web. You can see where we added OTT, but we're not seeing a decrease in any previous platform's streams. So these streams are really incremental streams. So it's either engaging people on more than one platform or we're reaching new audiences through those platforms. It's great. Also in that same 3 years, we do have a pre-roll and mid-roll business on video. We've increased our sponsorship revenue 150%. And I can't say it's about measuring engagement, but it's a great story to be able to say our primetime ratings have actually increased 5% in the last year compared after being flat for the last few years. So definitely we can assume that digital is not harming on-air viewership. So what's next? So we're continuing to use this to inform our product roadmap. Obviously we've been very focused on video, and we continue to focus on how do you increase video consumption. So I have a product manager who's redesigning TV schedules. How do we connect engagement and viewership, video viewership with the TV schedule app? We're also looking at how do we extend this kind of framework to our non-PC platforms. So this is very PC-oriented, but do we have a different engagement metric on mobile? Do we have different benchmarks that we use on our mobile apps versus our connected device apps? And then sort of the final thing, and this is the big money question, right, is determining that multi-platform effect on engagement. So do people who consume PBS content on 2 or 3 or 4 platforms, are they more valuable than people who consume content on only one? Are they a subset of one audience, or are they discrete audiences? Do you need different content for those different platforms? So those are sort of the big questions that we're looking at going forward. So I'll leave you with sort of 3 tips if you're going to implement your own engagement metric. One is don't make it too complicated. If it's too complicated for the organization to understand, nobody's going to use it, and it's not going to serve any purpose. So you want to make sure that it fits within the vernacular of your organization. Number 2 is it doesn't have to be perfect. Start somewhere, even if it's just visits per visitor, increasing that. That's something that you can affect and understand. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can iterate over time. We certainly have iterated over the years with both the metric and how we use the metric and how we communicate the metric. It's not rocket science here, so I'm not trying to get anybody to the moon. So if it's not perfect, it's not perfect. We'll keep working on it. And just as we iterate in product development, we'll iterate in metrics as well. And finally, be patient. So when you're implementing this kind of engagement metric and you're trying to come up with tactics to move the metric one way or the other, it takes time to move that needle. So don't get frustrated if you have a metric and the next month you say, oh, it didn't change. It does take some time, and you have to be willing to also commit to tactics to try to move those metrics if you're going to set a metric. And that, I think, is it.